There we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this installment of Game RT's webinar series. I am Danielle Costello. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a member at large for the Games and Gaming Roundtable of the American Library Association, as well as our events programming coordinator. I'm a research librarian at Louisiana State, and today for you, I am the question and answer host for the session. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be available to Game RT members 6 months before becoming publicly available on the Game RT website. We're also streaming the session live on Twitch. Hello, Twitch viewers. Twitch is a video on demand, will be accessible after the 6-month member only period as well. If you aren't following Game RT on Twitch already, please give us a follow so we can build the channel and look at our exciting programs that'll be happening over there. Link will be added in the chat pretty soon. For anyone previously not familiar with Games RT, we are the Games and Gaming Roundtable of the American Library Association. Our mission is to promote gaming in libraries, whether it's programming, collection development, community building, prototyping, playtesting, or research. Game RT has 2 professional development series, a webinar series such as this, and a learn and play series. These events are alternating each month. This month, going Solo Analogue Gaming, its benefits and how they're designed is what we're here for today. But first, let me talk to you a little bit more about upcoming events. And Finley, if you'll progress the slides, please. Thank you so much. First, we're going to have tomorrow our Spooky Spectacular, starting at 12:30, going till 10 p.m., maybe a little bit later. This is a session where the Film Media Roundtable, the Games and Gaming Roundtable, and the Graphics, Novels, and Comics Roundtable of ALA will all collaboratively be hosting a multi-session spooky themed event. We'll talk about our favorite, most fulfilling spooky forms of media, play some thrilling games, read some spine-tingling adventures, and top it off with something chilling. Also coming up very, very soon, November 1st is International Games Month. International Games Month is our initiative run by volunteers from the library organizations around the world to reconnect communities through their libraries around education, recreation, social values of all types of games. Links will be added so that way you can go and join the fun as well. And then on Twitch, specifically, we're going to have 2 upcoming events, a Low Stress High Mayhem, which is a live play TTRPG session where members will explain the games, talk about them and how they can be added to programming. Our upcoming RPG that we're going to be playing is Halo and Horns by Connie Chang. Halo and Horns is a comedic micro RPG with 2 GMs, one an angel, one a devil, and 1 player, the mortal they're trying to win over. And our final event I'd like to talk about today is Roundtable on November 16th, where we're going to be talking with one of our members about games and libraries, and in the particular, this one on games and grants and how we can bring gaming into the library via grants. And so let's get on to today's presentation. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session. Questions can be asked in chat during the presentation. They can potentially be missed, but I will try and catch them later, and I'll monitor the Twitch for chat questions as well. If you have questions, please submit them. We're very, very excited. So now, please let us welcome Finley Palaniki. Finley Palaniki is a recent graduate of Staffordshire University who is progressing onto their postgraduate studies in analog gaming. They are super queer, and this is a huge influence on their studies and how they encounter designing analog games. If you want to talk about TTRPGs and or cryptids, you can email Finley at the addresses that will be added to the chat shortly. Thank you so much for coming to talk with us today, Finley, and I hand things over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for having me. I'm, as I say, super excited to be talking about this. And yeah, this is going solo. So obviously they're going to be covering benefits and their design from my perspective of a designer and a researcher. So as a part of my undergrad, I actually designed a prototype for a solo journaling game while researching them as like a really partially theoretical, partially practical project. So my overall goal, as with the end of my master's, will be to have a publishable paper about solo journaling games. I think they're super neat, and I'm, as I say, very excited to be talking to you about them. So all the designers, I'm going to be going through a lot of games that exist and kind of relating to my experiences with these games. I will be crediting all of them in the presentation, but I believe they're also on the handouts that Danielle's put together. And assume that if I put like an @ symbol followed by a username, it's probably their Twitter account, unless I state otherwise. And yeah, I'm just going to get right on with it. Yeah, feel free to follow me on Twitter. I don't use it for much, but I am also there. So starting with the big question, what is a solo journaling game? So in my first paper, I defined it as a form of experimental gameplay that is focused on being a single player experience. The method of playing is through journaling and adapting what is often marked as a meditative practice into a creative outlet for role-playing purposes. And that is the most succinct way I could probably break it down. It is essentially playing with yourself and writing things down. And you'll see, like, through examples that I'll put up very shortly, you are interacting with prompts and responding to them within a journal, in character, usually role-playing as a multitude of things. As I'll go over, there's so many different forms of these games and so many different ways that you can interact with them. So how is it played? You'll get a rule book and you'll want a way to document your game. I most commonly kind of use a notebook and a pen and paper, but you can use word processing documents, microphone and recording softwares. I kind of alter them depending on the vibes of the game. Some more like sci-fi heavy games really lend themselves to that kind of audio recording like vibe that you get, and listening to them back, where a little bit cringy, can be a lot of fun as you're telling yourself a story essentially. And obviously the rule books are very, very often PDFs, or some are done in physical print, so easily accessible. Most games outline the goals, they set the scenes, and then they tell you the phases of gameplay that you'll go through, which are usually a series of prompts and questions to really get your mind creatively thinking around this. So with an example of my game, Welcome to Brightbrook, this game is about being encrypted in a small town and making connections and conversing with people. So where one gaming session is, that takes place over the course of a night. So what you get up to in one evening. The phases of gameplay that you go up to are generating where you're going, so the location that your gaming session takes place in that evening, who you will be talking to that night in that place, and how the conversation goes. As you can see, I've kind of got a couple of tables up here, and that's kind of how it's presented in of itself within my rulebook, right? So the way I do the gameplay of generating the conversations particularly is using a paper fortune teller, which I will get into later, of how to generate random prompts, and like what the common uses are. But yeah, so it's just, you generate these three phases. You go through the processes of thinking, well, what does the location look like? What does this character look like? And then my game particularly is meant to inspire how you would respond to this prompt within a conversation. Okay, here's a big one. It's a bit information overload, but I will go through these kind of with as much brevity as I can, while really trying to get across that these games are so broad and so spectacular vibes. So I'm going to start over on the left-hand side with The Wretched. The Wretched by Chris Bissay is I've described it in a few words as sci-fi, dread, and survival. It's inspired by the likes of Alien, and the premise is that you are the sole survivor of some terrible spaceship incident. And this is one that I love doing audio recordings for, actually. I think it gets that more futuristic vibe to it. It also gives my hand a break from doing so much writing. But yeah, it's one of these games with high tension. It gives you really introspective moments where you really have to consider your loneliness and isolation in such high stakes. And if you're into that, it's a great way to kind of process these kind of external emotions that we don't usually get in day-to-day lives. I don't know if people are frequently getting stuck on spaceships, but it's a fun way to tap into that. And it's also got some really interesting mechanics, and is one of the core games that you can get reference documents to recreate a game in a similar style. So it uses specifically a tumbling block tower to represent as a timer and like personal stress levels within the game. So obviously the more blocks you pull from the tower, the more intense the gameplay is meant to get, as you are slowly but surely going to fail eventually. It sounds really depressing, but I promise it's great fun. Moving on to a more lighthearted one, Artifact by Jack Harrison is object-oriented, as I say there, and it is about the stories of magical items within fantasy games and, you know, realms of fantasy, and their origins, their creation, and then who owns these magical objects. But you write it from the perspective of the object. So I did one about a magical sword and how it was forged and kind of how it gets passed around between people, and then eventually I ended that specific gameplay with it being destroyed by a band of like heroes. So you kind of go through that narrative of creating this massive story that you actually end up getting really involved in, because you are the sword essentially. Oh, I've just noticed that I'm getting really dark in here. Sorry, give me a moment. Completely my bad. Sorry, moving swiftly onwards, Colossal by Nick Angel. This is the stand-in one, in my opinion, for that kind of generic tabletop role-playing game, fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons-esque epic that you want in a solo perspective. It does so well at making everything seem, as it says in the game, colossal. It's exploration-based. It's so crunchy with the numbers, if you like that. It's great fun, and it's gorgeously illustrated. Apothecaria, again, another very different one. Potion making role-playing game. You are a witch in this kind of new town, and you are going out and collecting ingredients. It's so fun, it's so comforting, and Anna Blackwell, she releases like little additional tables for different themed ones, and this month on her Patreon she has like little Halloween inspired add-on to Apothecaria, which I think is really neat, like the rolling concept that you're constantly building on these games. And there's always more to add. Be like a crow, as it says on the tin. You be like a crow. You choose between like a crow or a jackdaw or a magpie, and you get up to crow-like shenanigans. I think it's, yeah, very whimsical. And you are basically just given goals and missions of whatever a crow gets up to. Right now, I've got like a cyberpunk setting going up that it supplies you with. My crow is taking down the government single-handedly by stealing all the shiny things. And Thousand-Year-Old Vampire, by Tim Hutchins, I could only think of the word introspective because it's in the mechanics. It's not only just you documenting the lifespan of a vampire, it's you also appreciating that when you live that long, things become so temporary, right? And it's understanding that on a very emotional level. And there is plenty of safety tools in amongst all these games that I've talked about. And this isn't even just like, this is like a snapshot into just kind of the broadness of what you get out of these games. You know, you get given narratives, you get inspired to make your own narratives. It's really about just giving someone a rule set and seeing what they create and what they produce and how you feel afterwards. So common themes within solo journaling games. Exploration kind of breaks off into two branches of emotional exploration and narrative exploration. Obviously, some games do not necessarily provide you with this narrative exploration. I'll start with, I'll be contrary to how I've written it. So some games give you more goals and urge you as the player to react to those goals and however you see fit. So you'll be able to piece it together, the narrative that you're exploring. Whereas something like Apothecaria gives you a story hook right from the start. And it urges you to kind of continue researching that while you're doing your potion making and while you're, you know, establishing your own like perceived narratives, you're also following this like kind of underlying one. And emotional exploration, it's really good for emotional processing. I think some games really do focus on, for example, feelings of isolation and loneliness, where such as The Wretched, or something like Thousand Year Old Vampire makes you focus on, I guess, similar emotions, but it allows you to process them in very different ways. Whereas The Wretched will just kind of encourage you as the player to work through this and work through these dark moments that it keeps throwing at you time after time. You know, you've lost all your tools, or, you know, there is a creature on your spaceship. What do you do? And it kind of encourages you to survive it. A Thousand Year Old Vampire is just about being able to let go. And I think as a person, for me, I've grown for actually playing these games as like a way of mentally processing some emotions that I feel at very different times. And I think that's just it's a really neat way to learn and kind of build on these techniques through obviously role playing. Creativity. Now, I say these are themes, it's very broad, but these are kind of common streaks within these games that I've picked out on. Some games put emphasis on making your journal or your, you know, Word documents look nice. And it's quite relaxing, actually. I point out later on, I've got so many pretty stickers to put into my Apothecaria journal. It's kind of ridiculous. And that kind of just like emotional respite of just sitting there and making pretty headers is, honestly, I can put enough hours into that and relax myself. Some are based on creating stories and obviously developing them. So what you put in is what you get out of it. You can play a game and you can read the prompt and think, well, of course I do this, and then leave it there. Or you can receive a prompt, like if I use my game again, you receive the prompt of a location, you get told it's a diner. You can then think to yourself, well, why are you going to this diner? Are you going there for food? What does the diner look like? And you can then create your own narratives and start developing them. And the whole point of Welcome to Brightbrick is developing your own conversations and relationships with not only the people, but also the area itself. And of course, this is a common thread in a lot of games, because if you don't put that in, you're not going to get a lot out of it. Like if you don't put enough into Artifact about your magical item, you're not going to get that much out of it. But that doesn't make it any less fun. I just think, as someone, myself personally, I'm so interested in these stories. What you put in is what you're going to get out 100%. And some games actually push you to make assets for your games, right? So while you're playing along, some games encourage that you map your journeys throughout them. In Colossal, it's heavily suggested that you draw out the maps that you're exploring as they generate around you. So you can think and have this additional asset, even if you're not the best artist, because I'm certainly not, but just kind of drawing out separate rooms and labeling them as an additional thing to this game really feels special. It feels like you're personalizing it yourself yet again. And again, it's what you put in is what you get out of it. And I think the biggest thing for me with solo journaling games is that these stories matter. The stories that you tell matter, no matter what it is. That's why people are making these games, right? They're encouraging people to tell these stories or to create these stories because they matter ultimately. They're fun. They're, they're pushing you to explore something. They're, it's all about the storytelling and finding emotional fulfillment, which I think I assume I'm in the right kind of audience to say, it's all about that same thing that you get from reading. These books are written because those stories matter. These rule sets are written because your story matters. And I just think it's a really neat thing that happens. And of course, with these very vague themes, you end up with some amazing concepts, right? Like all the way up to things like Thousand Year Old Vampire. You have games in the same vein that are about being a bee in a hive. There's a game called Bumbling. I've linked it at the end by Button King Games, and it is about being a bee, and you map out your beehive. And it's the exploration of being a bee. But that's because that bee's story matters. Your story as a bee matters, and I think it's fantastic. Again, all the games I'm saying here, I recommend 100%. So say following on from like creativity and stuff, this is one of the major benefits of playing. Creative writing exercises just got funky. When before looking into these, I'd really struggled to push myself to write creatively, even though I know what I've always known I wanted to be a writer. So having these like game sets and these rule sets to push myself to write stories is so great. You know, I'm going to be honest with everyone, I'm dyslexic, so I'm not the greatest at like writing and spelling, and already like through this creative outlet it's so much easier to process, right? And it's so much easier to get myself to do these things. And the stories I'm making, I'm so excited to implement in other things. Like I play a lot of like social tabletop games, right? So one of my books that I've got, I'm going to actually just hand over to my friends as like an artifact within the game. And these things are so cross compatible that it just becomes such like it becomes a labor of love. It becomes a part of you, and I think it's so fun to be able to have this way of creating stories. Yeah, creative journaling, making a pretty journal. I didn't think this was going to be as great as it would be, but I was wrong. Making a creative journal is great. Focusing on just getting a couple of colored pens involved in like your notebooks changed everything. Leafy stickers, I'm enamored. You know, it's that little, it pings something off in the brain, but I'm no psychologist. And yeah, I think for people that want something more than typical fantasy tabletop games, but don't necessarily want to take that dive into trying to find a group or trying to embrace like a really complex rule set, these games are bursting with creativity. Like there are so many games out there that there's definitely going to be one that resonates with you. Like I can't even imagine how many more there are since I last checked. There are so many upcoming. I know there's one upcoming about being a sea captain out on the oceans with like this whole fantasy element of mermaids and like, you know, charting the stars by Leon Baralio. I believe that's how you say their name. I've linked that one. It looks amazing. I know I've seen loads be kickstarted. There's just so many different versions of a role-playing game that you can play by yourself. So many different situations that are just pushing the boundaries, honestly, of these gameplays and like themes. And I think it's neat, quite frankly. So another benefit of playing is learning. The learning curve is so easy. You know, you can pick up reading and writing skills, as I said, I have, but they're incredibly easy to just pick up and play. They're, as I say, often PDFs or very small rule books. Many use charts or many use like tables and stuff. And commonly they use things like six-sided dice, which I know even my mum had some of those. She was a big Yahtzee player. And maybe a deck of cards, but that's it. That's really all you need to just get going with some of these ones. Some of them you can even just use online generators. You know, it's so simple to get into it. There's no sit down having to, you know, look through 5 rule books and then having to try and find people to play with. It's just yourself. If you've got a notebook, you've got a pen, you've got a generator online, you can go for this. So positive emotional processing, I think it's very handy. Obviously, there's safety nets in place in many of these games, you know, recommending that you don't play it at certain times. But there is a lot to be gained from kind of looking back at like maybe some less than optimal times that you've had, and then reflecting on how you worked through it through role playing and as I say, as a personal experience, that's very valuable to me. Obviously, I'm not looking into, my research doesn't really turn around children, but children really are able to grasp these things really easily. I've been playing some with my little brother. I've got a different game of Be Like a Crow that I play with my younger brother, and he loves it. You know, he's not a reader, which is mad to me because I was like massive. I was always in the library. He doesn't do reading. So trying to get him to, like, you know, learn these new skills of like writing and interpreting like prompts and stuff, and like pushing his creativity, I can just really see that he's warming up to books at the very least. And they're very low cost. Like, it's very easy to enter either playing or designing these. There, you don't need much to get into it, and it's just, yeah, it's very accessible. Like, these games are all about accessibility. There is so many coming out because people can just make them, and it's phenomenal. So here's my very short slide on why I think they'd work in a library. As someone that was a bookworm in a library, I would have thrived off of these kind of things. So they're usually very sedate and meditative experiences for people that want a quieter time, and that's often what I use the libraries for. Um, and I think it's a good thing to do if you can't quite wrap your head around just sitting down and reading, whether it be for study or just for pleasure. If you want something a little bit more engaging, but not too like hyper, solo journaling games are the real good middle ground here. Low cost, I mean, if someone has access to a PDF, usually printers, you can print off a PDF. It's so easy to take these games with you to places or to implement them into libraries. I think it's just really simple, honestly. And it's a good taster of role playing before diving into role playing game groups, especially for anxious people or people who don't have the energy to interact with others that often. Uh, you know, if I think back to myself and I, you know, had the option to read a choose your own adventure book in a library, for example, there, I would always go for it because it was, you know, it was like reading an adventure that I was incorporated in. I got to make the choices there. And for me, that kind of parallels solo journaling games. Um, it's it's a good introduction to people that have been too afraid to enter the tabletop space as well, because they don't know if they can role play or if they can, you know, integrate themselves into these spaces. So it works very well to kind of introduce that in between of actually anyone can role play. And it's good if you just want to, like, if you had small groups of people that were all doing a different journaling game or doing the same journaling game. Even I've done it with my friends, and then we kind of meet together and talk about what happened in the session that we just sat and done peacefully together. Amazing. I can elaborate on this, but I'm going to keep zooming through. So this is the designing a game part. Improvise, adapt, and overcome. This is associated with survival skills, but I promise this relates. So improvisation. It's a core mechanic of solo role-playing games usually. It puts a lot on the player to improvise and extrapolate. But also on the designer, because you kind of have to be able to write in how this works, right? So you have to understand essentially how other people could pull out and improvise as much as they can. You don't want to give people too close prompts, but you don't want to leave them so open that people kind of freeze up, right? Adapting. So turning multiplayer games into single player games is a really interesting subsect, right? I've seen tons of hacks for things like Dungeons and Dragons and the like, right? And it's quite difficult. It's more difficult than you think it is. I'm currently partaking in a game jam at the moment for the game Locust by Cobblepath Games. It's like a horror game, so perfect for spooky season, and I'm attempting to make a solo hack for it and trying to combine what is often seen as two roles into one, like the kind of the storyteller and the player. into one role or make the storyteller automated is again kind of a mass thing to consider when trying to adapt games. It's definitely a challenge to take that, but with kind of the ideas behind solo journaling games where they're generating prompts and you are being prompted by your situation, again, it then turns into something what you put in is what you get out, which I think is a good enough mantra to apply to most tabletop scenarios. And another thing I identified while designing a prototype for a game is overcoming road bumps, like keeping to your scale, and the much hated "is it fun" question. First of all, to answer that question, yes, it will be fun because people like A, elements of randomness, and B, there is someone out there for your game. I know I'm not necessarily talking to designers, but there will always be someone interested in the themes and the concepts, right? It will be fun. It doesn't sound it on like on paper, drawing a card and then kind of trying to find the meaning of that card in a rule book and then writing it down. But you can't shoot it down before you try it, okay? And keeping to scale, solo journaling games, there's some reference documents that I'm going to go through now for people that may be interested in trying to run game jams or try to design a game themselves. And that really helps with keeping to scale. But just to like kind of keep in mind of what I did, I wanted to keep for a prototype, very few options. So I mainly chose a six-sided die. And then I decided to implement a paper fortune teller, which would allow for more options than a six-sided die or make people roll multiple six-sided dice, but not as many options as a 52 card deck. So I was able to kind of manage that by implementing ways to be like, okay, so how can I manage the prompt generation specifically so I don't overwork myself? So yeah, as I say, system reference documents of existing games. So SRDs are like style guides, right, to making games to similar themes to ones that have been made before. This is like usually a labor of love from the designers or people that are fans of games and stuff. They are made with the intent. Sorry, okay, I think I'm back. Sorry, I think my microphone broke for a second there. My bad. Yeah. So SRDs, they're like a labor of love. They are made and published to encourage people to make games, right? These games, other people want them to be made. And it's so nice to see, like I've got a handful of them that I'm going to share with you guys. Well, I'm not personally going to share, I'm just going to introduce you to them. And they allow you to engage with particularly unique mechanics or concepts that are kind of isolated to certain games. Sorry if I'm going too quickly. I feel like I'm, going to run out of time, but my bad. So yeah, here are the three main SRDs that I've been able to pick up. So we have the Carter system reference document by Peach Garden Games. This system is, for the lack of a better term, you use a deck of cards as both a board but also as a way to make generations. So you also utilize like a thing to represent you as a marker almost, and you'll journey throughout the cards. It makes more sense if you click on the link. It's a really unique way of exploration. It's very big on exploration-based systems, like their own, for example, inspired by Apex Predator, their game that is based on the Monster Hunter video games. So if you wanted to come from someone wants to come from video games over to solo journaling games, people are filling in that niche as well. They are, really trying to get more people interested, I think, is the main bit for designers of solo journaling games there. And then we have the Witch's Almanac, which uses the Carter SRD, which I've not personally played, I'll be honest, but it looks like so much fun. And again, turning this exploration-based system for something slightly different is just one of very many ways that you can use these documentations and really transform them. We have the Lost and Found system by Mousehole Press. The Jack Harrison, who did Artifact. I've actually played the other game that Jack Harrison has done called Bucket of Bolts, which is like a sci-fi hack, and essentially it's the life of a spaceship. It's how it's, you know, how it was built. You play for how it was built, the people that it's owned, what damages has it taken, and the stories that you as the spaceship have seen. Now, if you want to get really meta with it, you could use something like that in The Wretched and kind of cross them over, which I think is a super interesting concept, but I'm getting distracted. The Lost and Found system reference document is so tight. There's a lot to it, and it walks you through so simply how to integrate the system of being an object and creating stories about that object. And as you can see, an example is Beloved by Percy Proper. It's about being a toy and the lives of this toy, which again, it's a rabbit hole for creativity. And then one of my personal favorites, Wretched and Alone, based off of The Wretched. It uses the same tumbling tower mechanic. It uses like a deck of cards, and it's mostly about kind of building tension and emphasizing loneliness. So the Sealed Library is one of my favorite solo journaling games. You are a librarian trying to protect, books, artifacts from oncoming bombardment. And I often play it without the block tower because I've got a long running game of I'm just seeing how long my librarian lasts. And I think it's a fantastic game. It's so much fun. It's, again, one of those ones where I've nearly filled up a notebook with all of the extra things that I'm putting into it, and the fulfillment I'm getting out of it is so juicy. So with that in mind, when designing a game, and designing a solo journaling game with mechanics and scale, many SRDs give you that. So most of them will say, oh, hey, you need so many cards, or you need a deck of cards or a tumbling tower block. So this is how you get the idea of what the mechanics are. Most of them outline what they are and how they function, which is very, very helpful. But you'll definitely be able to pick up very easily. Most of the time, the very minimum is using a coin. Even I say a D6, a six-sided dice, but you could just do all the prompts on a coin flip, I suppose, if you wanted to. And I see many games that use a deck of cards and just have a table for what each card represents. I think another game that I can think of off the top of my head is Alone in the Ancient City. That just gives you a table. It gives you a lovely introduction of you are alone in an ancient city, and you will then eventually turn over cards and see what you explore. There's nothing to it. There's no pressure. You just explore with this deck of cards. The main aspect of the main mechanic really is being able to give that element of randomness to your game, because that's really the game of it, right? That's you and the game itself. It's the randomness. The rest of it is all up here. But other than that, the sky's the limit. The games are very simple, and there are really no rules. You can use whatever you like. As I say, I used a paper fortune teller. Many games ask for you to use polyhedral dice. I've seen more games introduce tarot cards. I just think that there is so many ways to implement the core mechanics. Like, I think you could totally use a tumbling block tower like that to generate the prompts, even not even to use as a timer per se. But the main thing is randomness. How do you generate these prompts? How do you encourage someone to partake in this? And that's about that. I don't know what the time is because I didn't have a timer up with me. But here's the big old kind of ending bit. I'm trying to think, did I miss any of the games? No, but I did mention a couple more, which I'll grab together and throw in the chat afterwards. yeah, sorry, that was kind of a flyby.
No, that was excellent. Thank you so much, Finley. You are perfectly on time. All is good. We're at 43, so you
Oh,
timed
thank
it
God.
excellently. And we have several questions in the chat.
Oh,
If you'll
nice.
drop down screen share, I
Yeah.
will start asking them. And everybody definitely feel free to add more in the chat as we're going on. There was a lively discussion about how excited we are to have solo RPGs and the potential for both putting it in our collection, our different programming ideas. We want to just have it at some of our events as colleagues to just have fun with each other. So
Oh, yeah,
thank you so much for
absolutely.
giving us those ideas. So to start, Liz Brown asks, how do you introduce these games, especially to people new to the format and perhaps reluctant readers in the way that gets them invested and interested?
Um, okay, so it is particularly, I wouldn't say it's that difficult. I think you've just got to be able to read like kind of the people that you're trying to market it to, right? So let's use the example of my younger brother. He saw me having fun and engaging with it, and obviously children like to see when you're doing something. So I was getting out proper like feathers, and I was sticking into a notebook and stuff, and he was engaging with it. He wanted to see what I was doing. um, and I think inviting people that are new to the format, I think just trying to like demystify the scariness of learning a new system. A lot of people think learning a new game, like especially a tabletop game, they think it's very, very difficult. They think of a lot of rule books, they think of Dungeons and Dragons. But if you really demystify it and say, no, 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 it's like a 10-page PDF and most of it's tables. I think really like making it seem as simple as it is, and maybe starting with smaller ones that just use a six-sided dice for sure.
Mhm.
Um, it's very easy to get people going along with it. Also, just telling people about your experiences if you have them. I got my friends to play Apothecaria because I was saying, I'm a potion making witch with this scrungly little owl familiar.
Yeah,
you
I'll
know,
definitely. Yeah, getting hype is, I think, a really great way of just getting other people excited about things. So we have another question from the Twitch chat, and it's I was from Prof. Runsell. I'm wondering about what might be some of the harder features of multiplayer games being adapted for solo. Like, what had been the hardest for you in terms of hacking game in a game jam? Any suggestions for newbies starting with games they like, and how easy is it to adapt and change and put those into solo?
I'll say very easily things that are like combat related. I completely, well, I didn't completely skim over it, but I decided that for my personal hack for Locus, I'm kind of going to minimize on the combat engagement, but it is possible. It's very much without making it like you're just kind of rolling dice between yourselves. You've got to put a lot more into kind of creating stock actions, I guess, for the game to generate for you, and then let you have that response, which can seem a little bit restrictive, a little bit clunky. But I think if you really try and pick out your favorite aspects of certain games of how they do combat, I've gotten really into Monster of the Week. I love how Monster of the Week functions. And I'm just like, oh, that makes it so much easier to try and break down how combat works because you just say what you do, and then maybe it works, maybe it doesn't.
Mhm.
um I think it's just trying to pick out the parts that you like, and I wish you the best of luck because I haven't quite fully figured it out myself.
That's 100% fair. It takes a while sometimes to figure all these things out. And then a question from Tom Taylor. Is there a searchable hub for solo journaling games? Tips on finding more games?
There isn't so much of a searchable hub at the moment, but often if you look at things like on itch.io is a really great place if you look at physical games and kind of search by solo. I found a lot of games through doing that. Solo or single player is usually the keywords that I'll look on itch. Um, the thing is, right, I found more solo journaling games by following designers on Twitter,
Mhm.
right? Because the
Oh,
designers,
yeah.
that's a very close community, right? So if you follow the handful of designers that I've suggested, right, they'll be reblogging other people's solo journaling projects, and you'll just end up surrounded by them eventually.
Oh yeah, the serendipitousness of discovering and making your feed. Like I have had so many things that I was like, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. I have no more money, but I'm going to put that in my two. What's nice about Itch is you can make a library of things you want to explore later, so you can keep everything for
Yeah,
later times. So it's
yeah, for
very
sure.
exciting.
I say also on itch specifically, I don't know if like many people here have, but I got specifically the bundle for Ukraine and the
Mhm.
bundle for racial justice. Both of those have a ton of games. Some of the ones that I've mentioned, most of them involve the Wretched. Both of them involve the Wretched, I know that much. Bumbling's in one of them. Like a lot of the games that I've mentioned, I've just pulled out from those lists. So if you supported either of those bundles, like earlier this year, a couple of years ago, go back and have a look because solo games are in there.
Oh yeah. Then another one from Liz. So when you're playing through these games or reflecting on them later, how do you find yourself falling into story pattern? Do you find yourself falling into storytelling patterns? If so, how do you shake things up and challenge yourself?
Yeah, okay. I do sometimes because sometimes you kind of end up telling the same story again and again. And really, what I do personally is I'll either, discard a prompt that I've, seen before, or if I think it's too similar, or to really challenge myself, I'll draw another one and think, what if both of these happened at the same time?
Oh,
Like add that challenge in because the game doesn't obviously doesn't encourage this, but you totally can. So that's how I've personally encountered that, and then put that level of, well, now two things are happening at once. How would I react to that? And that kind of pushes as again like a different form of storytelling. Also,
mhm,
going and playing other games and engaging with obviously other stories gives you new inspiration that you didn't really think to encounter before.
mhm,
So jumping between things like the sealed library and Be Like a Crow are really kind of pushing, Be Like a Crow is be very goal oriented.
mhm,
So if I flip back over, I'm thinking, oh God, I'm, thinking about how to execute a mission on a hex map. Whereas, before I'd be thinking about it as getting the thing from A to B, it's more convoluted as there's a bit more strategy from playing like other games and stuff now, if that makes sense. I'm
mhm. It
sorry.
does. No, no, it's a very different mindset I find when you're playing because when I started solo RPGs, I wasn't quite sure about them because I was like, well, I know my own head and everything that's going to happen in it. So it's like, how is that a game? But then when you get into the mechanics and the rules, you're like, oh, the framework of play really kind of sells like the experience. And then it's like, now I'm getting really introspective. And it's one of my favorite styles of game because it's like part of the joy of playing a game is like, we know we're going to go into the experience. So I'm not going to just like, I win the day. It's like, I want to
Mm,
have the experiential, putting the things in there, the struggle, the challenges, challenge myself. So
yeah.
yeah, 100% get that.
One of the things as well is like when reflecting on the games as well is so when I play the Wretched specifically, I'll take notes when I'm pulling certain cards and stuff, and when I'm generating these situations, I'll leave it and I'll go back to it later in the day to do the audio recording as if I'm in the moment, which then forces the sudden kind of actions of something I didn't quite think about, but then I'll, properly trying to immerse myself into it. Obviously, you can journal it as you go, but I think that's just a different way of playing it that really forces that new creativity, right?
Mhm.
And
Oh,
a lot of these games have soundtracks as well, right? So the Wretched, Apothecary, they all come with like some of these games are like obviously creatives coming together to create more immersive experiences, right? So some of them you can listen to soundtracks too, and it's phenomenal.
I love how deep you can go. So Jen, Car Dennis, sorry about the last name, just asked a question and she says, I'm new to this and plan to have events next month. So I have a lot of questions, but you don't have to answer them all. And I'll just go through them. Just feel free, whichever
Mhm.
one you want. How do you go about running a solo RPG event for teens? How do you welcome them into the space? And what do you recommend for having several game? What kinds of games for if you have several available, or is it easier to just have one available?
I would say have several available. I mean that they are very much like print and play. They're very kind of cost effective. Obviously some of them have higher price boundaries and stuff, but the ones that you can get, you may as well get like a few PDFs and print out a few copies of these different games and really show that there are different avenues, especially for teenagers, right? If some of them might be looking for more of a high action, high octane thing, whereas some of them will be looking for a bit more of a some of them will be looking for bumbling,
Yes,
you know. And
100%.
I think for running an event, yeah, absolutely, try and get your hands on a few games, and really see, like, try and get a few different ones,
Mhm.
and to introduce them to the space. I think first of all, making sure that everyone, like, it's okay to talk as well during it. You don't need to impose this isn't quiet time,
Mhm.
you can sit there and converse and be like, oh, what do you think I should, engage people in that
Mhm.
conversation, because
So
it'll get people
semi-solo.
interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. You can introduce them like that. If you don't want them to sit down and, this is a silent activity, you can tell them, hey, it's your game, it's your solo game, but you can discuss it with people. That's half the fun, right?
I love that idea that it's more than just being in your head. It's like a more you can have a communal solo experience. So you
Yeah,
have all the
yeah.
agency within your world, but then you're sharing that world with everyone else as well.
Yeah, I mean, let's say Apothecary is one of the ones I support a lot, and there's an entire Discord server, right? Just people talking about their familiars and, how they drew this one flower, and you drew it completely differently, and it's great. So you can make it like a communal thing, but also
Mhm.
putting the focus of, if you want to sit and have this, uh, quiet time, let them have that quiet time. You just try and,
Mhm.
introduce it as softly as possible, I guess.
Now on kind of a slightly flipped, still having an event type thing and introducing people to solo games, but what about game jams? What kind of resources or things would you provide if we kind of opened our libraries up to a game jam? What do you think would be important for us to either explain to the people going in, we're going to have a solo game jam, this is
Mm.
how it goes, or kind of what mechanics or resources do you think would be valuable?
Resources wise, few decks of cards, many decks of cards, let people, most people kind of know what that is. And just, if you want to sell it to people, right, just say it's a game that uses a deck of cards, but it's not solitaire. Like, I think doing that, possibly getting kind of, obviously, getting some of these references to the SRDs that I've linked
Mhm.
before, that will be absolutely helpful. Possibly, have a few examples about, so people can flick through them and understand, like, the format, right? But other than that, designing wise, you can design on a piece of paper and a notebook. Like, I've got a design notebook, right? That's the thing. You can do it on a computer, but all of my ideas start in a notebook and a pen. If you just give people, pens, paper, coloring pens, maybe, if you wish, coloring pencils and stuff, and just tell them, look, design something, so you want to give someone, like, for a jam specifically, I
Mhm.
think giving a theme. So if you wanted to
Oh,
do
brilliant. Yeah.
things, like, give like a generalized theme of, like, I don't know, off the top of my head, friendship, right? Friendship is so broad that you have to make a game about friendship. You can make a game for friendship. You could do like if you keep the theme broad enough, for the game jam, and then give people the resources, people will try and gamify it, I think. If you're aiming at the right people and
Mhm.
you say, hey, make solitaire fun and about dinosaurs, is another free one right there.
We're gonna take it and run. I gotta take that one and run. That's gonna be a delight. Oh, thank you so much. We have about 3 minutes left. If anybody has any other questions or ideas to toss in, lots of appreciation. Dinosaurs are magic, so we're gonna take that. You're gonna see a lot of dinosaur solo RPGs pretty soon. That's all thanks to you. We're gonna put that in our, thank yous. Is that that's so exciting.
But yeah,
Yeah, I'm
just give a
imagining.
theme,
Yeah.
and you know
Brilliant. Well, do you have any
I don't
last
know.
minute advice or any like particular favorite things? Because I'm thinking while we have you here, is there a favorite mechanic that you have that's something that just blows your mind that's like, this is elegant, simple, or just really exciting?
Okay, so one that I really like is in Thousand Year Old Vampire. I couldn't talk about it too much because it's so much, but
Mhm.
one of the core mechanics is, after a certain period of time, like after so many pages or how much time has passed in game, you rip out some of your memories. It encourages you to kind of write things down on separate pieces of paper, right? But I forgot that memo, so I had written it in my notebook, and it was something that I don't generally do, but it was strangely cathartic and so simple, because obviously as a vampire, you will forget things.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're not going to remember all these details about these people that you've seen. And it's so simple and really put into perspective for me. I've got anxiety, so I'm like, everyone won't remember that one time I messed up.
That's such a good thought. Yeah. I do. I haven't ever, I've seen A Thousand Year Old Vampire, but haven't read any of the mechanics. Now I'm very excited to dig in because that sounds super cool.
Yeah, right. It's something that I was like, wow, that's such an effective way to just make it a bit more personal, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of the idea of what is mortality and what is immortality. It's like we all are like, yeah, immortality is cool, but then here's the flip side of things. Here's why it's a flaw. Here's
Yeah.
all the things you have to struggle with. But still comes back to our mortality because eventually there'll be things we just don't remember anymore.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna bring this back because we now have Die November. So that is our current game jam. We're very excited. We're gonna roll with
Oh,
this, Finley.
absolutely. Go
I will
for
let
it.
you know all the exciting things that come out of it.
You know,
Well, if we have nothing else, then thank you so very much. We're really appreciative of your time, your efforts you put into this, and coming to talk with us. Everybody says hearts, 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 raw. So I
raw.
think that that is a perfect way to end. And again, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the webinar. There will be surveys and other shenanigans, so keep an eye on your emails. But until then, take care, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Right. And end.